There is a unique and profound silence that settles over a place once filled with life. It's more than just the absence of sound. It's the weight of unspoken stories, the echo of footsteps that no longer fall, the ghost of laughter that has long since faded. It is the sound of a city that has died, a community that has ceased to be, a population that has, for all intents and purposes, simply vanished from the face of the earth. We build our cities as monuments to our own permanence. We lay stone on stone, raise towers to the sky, and pave roads with the assumption that they will outlast us, that they will serve our children and our children's children. We see them as bastions against the chaos of the natural world, as enduring symbols of human achievement and resilience. But history whispers a chilling counter-narrative, a collection of cautionary tales about civilizations that reach their zenith only to be erased. This is not a story about gradual decline, about the slow, predictable decay of empires that crumble over centuries. This is an investigation into a far more disturbing phenomenon, the mass disappearance. We are looking into the historical equivalent of a cold case file, one where the entire population of a town or city is the missing person. These are the stories of places that were thriving one moment and eerily empty the next, leaving behind only riddles etched in stone and dirt. From the dense, fog-shrouded forests of the New World to the sun-baked canyons of the American Southwest, from the volcanic islands of the Aegean to the sprawling river valleys of ancient Pakistan, the pattern repeats itself with haunting consistency. People build, they thrive, they create complex societies, and then they are gone. The question that echoes through these silent streets and empty homes is not just what happened, but how could it happen so completely? Join us as we descend into the heart of these enigmas. We will sift through the archaeological dust, examine the conflicting theories, and attempt to reconstruct the final, frantic days of these lost populations. We seek to understand the forces, be they environmental, social, or something far more mysterious, that can compel thousands of people to abandon their homes and walk away from everything they have ever known, disappearing into the mists of time. This is a journey into the quiet heart of history's greatest unsolved disappearances. It is a search for the ghosts of lost cities and the vanished people who once called them home. The evidence is scarce, the witnesses are long dead, and the crime scenes have been weathered by centuries of wind and rain. But the mystery remains as potent and unsettling as the day the last person walked away and the silence began. Our investigation begins on the shores of a new and unforgiving world, a place of immense promise and equally immense peril. In the late 16th century, the coast of what would become North Carolina was a frontier, a line drawn between the known world of Elizabethan England and the vast, mysterious continent that lay beyond. It was here that a group of more than 100 men, women, and children gambled their lives on a dream of a new beginning, a dream that would curdle into one of America's most enduring nightmares. This was the Roanoke colony, sponsored by the ambitious and charismatic Sir Walter Raleigh. It was England's first serious attempt to plant a permanent settlement in North America. It was a venture fueled by national pride, the quest for riches, and the desire to challenge the dominance of the Spanish Empire. The colonists were not just adventurers, they were families, artisans, and farmers seeking a better life. They were led by Governor John White, an artist and cartographer whose own daughter, Eleanor Dare, was among the colonists. She was pregnant during the arduous sea voyage, and shortly after their arrival in 1587, she gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare. Virginia was the first English child born in the New World, a symbol of hope and the promise of a future for this fledgling community. But the reality of their new home was far from idyllic. The land was unfamiliar, supplies were dwindling, and relations with the local Native American tribes, initially promising, were beginning to sour. The colonists quickly realized they were ill-equipped to survive the coming winter without significant aid from England. A decision was made. Governor White, despite his protests, would have to return. He was reluctant to leave his family, his daughter Eleanor, and his newborn granddaughter Virginia. He feared the long and dangerous journey back across the Atlantic and the uncertainties of court politics that could delay his return. But the colony's survival depended on it. He promised to return with supplies and reinforcements as quickly as possible, within a matter of months. As he departed, he and the colonists agreed on a secret token. If they were forced to move from their settlement, they would carve their destination into a prominent tree or post. If they were in distress, they were to carve a Maltese cross above the name of the location. With this grim understanding, John White set sail, watching the small cluster of homes on Roanoke Island recede into the distance, unaware that he would never see any of its inhabitants again. His journey back was fraught with peril, but the dangers of the sea were nothing compared to the political storm he sailed into. England was on a war footing. King Philip II of Spain was assembling a massive naval force, the Spanish Armada, with the intent of invading England and deposing the Protestant Queen Elizabeth I. All available ships, resources, and manpower were being conscripted for the defense of the realm. John White's pleas for a supply mission to Roanoke fell on deaf ears. The fate of 100 or so colonists on a distant shore was a low priority compared to the existential threat of the Spanish fleet. His frantic efforts to secure a ship were repeatedly thwarted. Months turned into a year, then 2, then 3. 3 long, agonizing years passed, with White tormented by visions of his family and the colonists struggling to survive without him. Finally, in 1590, after the defeat of the Armada and endless delays, White managed to secure passage on a privateering expedition that agreed to stop at Roanoke. His relief must have been immense, though surely tempered by a gnawing anxiety. As his ship approached the coast, he saw a column of smoke rising from the island, a hopeful sign that the colony was still there, perhaps sending a signal to guide him in. But as they drew closer, a chilling quiet descended. The smoke was not from the hearths of the settlement, but from a forest fire. When they landed and made their way to the site of the colony, their hope turned to dread. The settlement was gone. Not destroyed, but dismantled. The houses had been carefully taken down, the area enclosed by a defensive palisade of tall trees, suggesting they had time to prepare and were not taken by surprise. There were no signs of a struggle. No bodies, no graves, no skeletons. It was as if the entire population had simply packed up and walked away. White and his men searched frantically for the signal, the carved message that would tell him where they had gone. He found it on one of a palisade post. A single, cryptic word carved in stark letters, Croatoan. There was no Maltese cross, no sign of distress, just the word. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, and the name of the friendly Native American tribe that inhabited it, led by their chief, Monteo, who had traveled to England and was an ally to the colonists. This seemed to be the answer. They had moved to Croatoan Island, a logical and relatively safe destination. White was desperate to follow this clue. His family, his granddaughter, were surely there, waiting for him. But the elements conspired against him. A powerful storm began to brew, threatening the ships. The captain of the expedition, having already lost anchors in the rough weather, refused to risk his vessel and his crew any further for what he considered a lost cause. He turned the ship around and set sail for the Caribbean. John White, heartbroken and defeated, was forced to return to England, never to see America again. He would die years later, never knowing the fate of the daughter and granddaughter he left behind. The mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke was born in that moment of despair, and it has haunted the American imagination ever since. What happened to the 115 men, women, and children who were left behind? The most straightforward theory, and the one John White himself believed, is that the colonists simply relocated to Croatoan Island to live with their native allies. It makes perfect sense. Faced with dwindling supplies and hostile neighbors, merging with a friendly tribe that knew how to survive in this new world would have been their best option. The lack of a distress signal further supports this idea. It was a planned move, not a desperate flight. Over the centuries, tantalizing clues have emerged that seem to bolster this theory. Later English explorers and settlers in the region heard tales from various tribes about people with light-colored eyes and European features living among them. Some even claimed to be descended from these mysterious settlers. The people of what is now Hatteras Island have long passed down oral traditions of their ancestors taking in the English colonists. In the 1930s, a series of inscribed stones, known as the Dare stones, were discovered. One, believed to be carved by Eleanor Dare herself, told a tragic story of the colonists' journey inland, of sickness and attacks from hostile tribes, culminating in the deaths of all but a handful of survivors. While the authenticity of most of these stones has been thoroughly debunked, the first stone remains a subject of debate, a potential, albeit controversial, voice from the past. More recently, modern archaeology has entered the fray. Excavations on Hatteras Island have uncovered English artifacts from the correct time period mixed in with native settlements. Pottery, parts of a flintlock musket, a sword hilt, these items prove there was a European presence on the island, but they don't definitively prove the entire colony relocated there. It could have been a small group or simply items traded from the original settlement. Another archaeological project, the Croatoan Project, has been systematically excavating sites on the island for years. They have found compelling evidence of cohabitation, of English and Native Americans living side by side. They argue that the colonists were not lost but simply assimilated. Their English identity gradually absorbed into the local culture over generations. In this view, Virginia Dare and the other children of Roanoke grew up, married, and had children of their own, their lineage becoming part of the fabric of the native peoples of the region. This is a hopeful and romantic version of events, a story of survival and cultural blending. It suggests that the colony didn't vanish, it simply transformed. But it is not the only possibility, and other, darker theories persist, born from the brutal realities of the 16th century frontier. One such theory is that the colony was wiped out, either by a hostile Native American tribe or by the Spanish. Relations with some local tribes were tense. The English, in their desperation, may have stolen food or trespassed on sacred land, provoking a violent response. A swift, brutal attack could have annihilated the settlers, leaving no survivors to tell the tale. However, this theory has a significant flaw: the state of the settlement when John White returned. The site was not a scene of carnage. There were no bodies, no burned buildings, and the houses had been carefully dismantled, not violently destroyed. A surprise attack would have left a very different kind of evidence. It's possible the men were killed while working in the fields and the women and children taken captive, but this is pure speculation. Then there is the Spanish threat. The Spanish considered the entire continent their territory and viewed the English settlement as an illegal incursion. They had a history of ruthlessly destroying rival colonies, such as the French settlement at Fort Caroline in Florida. It is certainly plausible that a Spanish patrol found the Roanoke colony and eliminated it to send a message to England. Records from the period have been scoured for any mention of such an attack, but none has ever been found. While it's possible a mission was carried out in secret, it seems unlikely that such a victory over their English rivals would not have been recorded somewhere. Furthermore, like the native attack theory, it doesn't quite fit with the lack of bodies or signs of a battle at the settlement site. There is also the possibility of a split. Perhaps the colonists didn't all go to the same place. The word Croatoan could have been a message indicating the destination of one group, while another, smaller party attempted to journey north towards the Chesapeake Bay, where they had originally intended to settle. This group could have perished along the way, their journey unrecorded. Archaeological digs at a site known as Site X, located about 50 miles inland from Roanoke, have uncovered more English pottery from the period. This suggests at least some of the colonists may have moved inland away from the coast. Perhaps they broke into smaller, more manageable groups to increase their chances of survival, scattering into the vast wilderness and losing contact with one another. This leads to another grim possibility, that the colonists, whether they moved to Croatoan, inland, or stayed put, simply succumbed to the harsh realities of their new environment. Starvation and disease were constant threats to all early European settlements. Without the promised resupply from England, their meager stores would have quickly run out. A harsh winter or a failed harvest could have spelled doom. If they died of disease or famine, one would expect to find their graves. But the colonists may have been too weak to bury their dead, or their bodies may have been scavenged by animals. It's a bleak scenario, but a tragically common one in the early history of American colonization. The empty, dismantled fort could have been their final desperate act, using the wood for shelter or fuel before the last of them perished. So what truly happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Were they absorbed into a friendly tribe, their English bloodline mingling with Native American ancestry? Were they massacred by enemies, their deaths unrecorded and their bodies lost to time? Did they split up, their small groups swallowed by the immense, indifferent wilderness? Or did they simply starve, their dream of a new life ending in a slow, quiet death? Each theory has its proponents, its fragments of evidence, and its glaring inconsistencies. The mystery endures because the central clue, the word Croatoan, is both a signpost and a red herring. It points to a destination but provides no confirmation that they ever arrived, or what became of them if they did. It is a single word hanging in a void of information. After more than 400 years, the fate of the 115 souls of Roanoke remains one of history's most compelling unsolved cases. The story continues to fascinate us because it represents the collision of hope and reality, the fragility of human ambition in the face of the unknown. They were pioneers, the vanguard of a new nation, and their story ended not with a bang, but with a chilling, unanswered whisper carried on the winds of the Outer Banks. We leave the misty shores of North Carolina and travel across the continent and forward in time to a landscape of stark, breathtaking beauty. Here, in the Four Corners region of the American Southwest, under a vast, unforgiving sky, another civilization built its home and then, just as mysteriously, walked away from it. Their cities were not built of wood and daub, but carved directly into the living rock of sheer canyon walls. These are the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde, and the people who built them are known to us as the ancestral Puebloans. For over 700 years, from roughly 600 to 1300 AD, they thrived in this challenging environment. They were master farmers, skilled artisans, and, above all, architectural geniuses. Their legacy is a collection of some of the most stunning and well-preserved archaeological sites in North America. To stand at the base of a cliff and gaze up at Cliff Palace or Balcony House is to be humbled by the ingenuity and sheer effort of their creators. These are not simple caves. They are multi-story apartment complexes, complete with living quarters, storage rooms, and ceremonial kivas, all nestled in massive rock alcoves hundreds of feet above the canyon floor. They are cities in the sky, testaments to a deeply sophisticated and organized society. For generations, the ancestral Puebloans lived on the mesa tops, farming corn, beans, and squash. They built villages of stone and adobe, their population growing steadily. Then, in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, something changed. For reasons that are still debated, they began to move from their accessible homes on the mesa tops down into these incredibly difficult-to-reach cliff alcoves. This was a monumental undertaking. Every stone, every log, every drop of water, and every basket of food had to hauled up or down the treacherous cliff faces, often using little more than hand and toe holds carved into the rock. Why would an entire society choose to live in such a precarious and inconvenient manner? The most common explanation is defense. The cliff dwellings are natural fortresses, easily defended from attack. This suggests a period of increasing conflict and instability. But who were they defending themselves from? Was it from rival Puebloan groups competing for scarce resources like water and arable land? Or was it from outside invaders, nomadic tribes moving into the region? The evidence is ambiguous. While some sites show signs of violence, others seem perfectly peaceful. Regardless of the reason, this period of cliff dwelling represents the golden age of the Mesa Verde culture. Communities flourished. At its peak, the region may have supported a population of over 20,000 people. They developed intricate pottery styles, wove beautiful textiles from cotton and yucca fibers, and maintained extensive trade networks that brought them seashells from the Pacific and turquoise from distant mines. They had a rich ceremonial life, centered around the circular, subterranean kivas that were the heart of every village. Here, spiritual and social life intertwined, guided by a complex understanding of the cosmos. Their art and architecture are filled with astronomical alignments, tracking the movements of the sun and stars to determine the rhythms of their agricultural and ceremonial calendar. And then they left. Not gradually, but with a suddenness that is breathtaking. Within the span of a single generation, from about 1275 to 1300 AD, the entire region was abandoned. The magnificent cliff palaces, which had taken a century of immense effort to build, were left to the elements. The people packed up what they could carry and simply walked away. When they left behind perfectly good homes, tools, and pottery. In some dwellings, archaeologists found cooking pots still sitting on the hearth, as if the owners intended to return for dinner. But they never did. The Four Corners region, once a bustling center of civilization, fell silent. The question that has baffled archaeologists for over a century is, why? Unlike the Roanoke colonists who left a single cryptic clue, the ancestral Puebloans left nothing. No written records, no carved messages. To solve this mystery, we must turn to the silent witnesses they left behind. The tree rings, the soil, the bones of the dead, and the oral traditions of their modern descendants, the Pueblo peoples of Arizona and New Mexico. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence comes from the trees. By studying the patterns of annual growth rings in the ancient wooden beams used to construct the cliff dwellings, scientists can reconstruct the climate of the past with remarkable precision. This science, known as dendrochronology, tells a stark and compelling story. It reveals that the period of the Great Migration coincided with a devastating, prolonged drought. This was not just a few dry years. This was the Great Drought, a period of severely reduced rainfall that lasted for more than 2 decades, from roughly 1276 to 1299. For a society entirely dependent on agriculture in an already arid land, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Springs would have dried up, crops would have failed year after year, and the wild plants and animals they relied on to supplement their diet would have become scarce. Imagine the desperation. The storage rooms, once full of dried corn, would have grown steadily emptier. The daily struggle for water would have become all-consuming. Malnutrition would have weakened the population, making them more susceptible to disease. The social fabric, stretched to its breaking point, would have begun to tear. This climate-based theory is powerful and well supported by the evidence. It paints a picture of a people forced out by an environmental catastrophe beyond their control. They didn't vanish, they migrated, seeking a new home in places with more reliable water sources, like the Rio Grande Valley in present-day New Mexico, where their descendants live today. But is the Great Drought the whole story? Some researchers believe it is too simplistic an explanation. The ancestral Puebloans had survived severe droughts before. Their culture was built on resilience in a harsh environment. Why was this time different? This leads us to other, interwoven theories that suggest the drought was not the sole cause, but perhaps the final straw that broke a system already under immense stress. There is compelling evidence of increasing social and political turmoil in the years leading up to the abandonment. The very move into the defensive cliff dwellings suggests a society on edge. Archaeological excavations have uncovered numerous skeletons from this period that show clear signs of violent trauma. Skulls crushed by clubs, bodies that were not properly buried. Some entire villages appear to have been burned. This violence could have been the result of warfare between different Puebloan groups. As the drought intensified, competition for the last remaining pockets of fertile land and water would have become fierce. What might have started as localized raiding could have escalated into endemic warfare, making life in the region untenable. The cliff dwellings were a response to this violence, but ultimately, the only real solution was to leave. There is also a darker, more disturbing possibility: internal conflict. Some archaeologists point to evidence of social stratification and the rise of a religious elite who may have demanded tribute from the common people. In a time of plenty, this system might have worked. But during a prolonged famine, if the religious leaders were unable to perform the ceremonies that were supposed to bring the rain, the people may have lost faith and risen up against them. This theory is supported by the condition of some ceremonial sites, which appear to have been deliberately desecrated before they were abandoned. It suggests a society turning on itself, a violent breakdown of the social and religious order that had held their world together for centuries. The migration, in this light, was not just a flight from drought, but from a failed society. Beyond climate and conflict, there is the land itself. The ancestral Puebloans may have been, in part, the architects of their own demise through environmental degradation. Over centuries of occupation, they had cut down forests for fuel and construction, depleting the local timber resources. Their farming practices may have led to soil erosion and the depletion of nutrients, reducing crop yields over time. When the Great Drought hit, the already stressed local environment simply could not support the population. The combination of a natural climate shift and self-inflicted environmental damage created a perfect storm of ecological collapse. The people had no choice but to abandon their ancestral homeland and search for a more sustainable place to live. Finally, we must consider the perspective of the Pueblo people themselves. Their oral traditions do not speak of a collapse, but of a migration. Their stories tell of a journey, guided by spiritual imperatives and prophecies, to find their center place. In this view, the move away from Mesa Verde was not a tragedy, but a divinely ordained and necessary chapter in their people's ongoing history. These traditions suggest that the abandonment may have been driven by a profound religious or ideological shift. Perhaps a new spiritual movement emerged that rejected the old ways and called for the people to leave the cliff dwellings behind. This doesn't contradict the other theories. In fact, it may be the cultural lens through which they experienced the drought and conflict. The environmental hardships may have been interpreted as a sign from the gods that it was time to move on. So what truly caused the great vanishing from Mesa Verde? The answer is likely not a single event, but a complex cascade of failures. A changing climate, a degraded environment, and escalating violence created a crisis that their society could not withstand. The decision to leave was likely a multifaceted one, made by thousands of individuals and families over several years, driven by a combination of desperation, fear, and faith. Unlike Roanoke, this was not a case of a people being lost to history. The ancestral Puebloans survived. They migrated, they regrouped, and they built new communities where their descendants, the Hopi, Zuni, and Rio Grande Pueblo peoples, live to this day. But they left behind their magnificent cities in the cliffs, silent monuments to their former glory. A powerful and sobering reminder that even the most impressive structures are no match for the forces that can compel a civilization to walk away and never look back. Our investigation now takes us south into the sweltering jungles of Central America, a region that was once home to one of the most brilliant and enigmatic civilizations of the ancient world, the Maya. For over 1,000 years, they dominated a vast territory that stretched from southern Mexico to Honduras. They built spectacular cities that rivaled those of ancient Rome or Egypt, and developed a culture of breathtaking complexity and sophistication. The Maya were not a unified empire, but a collection of powerful, competing city-states, each ruled by a divine king or Kuhul Ajao. Cities like Tikal in Guatemala, Palenque in Mexico, and Calakmul in the heart of the Yucatan Peninsula were sprawling urban centers, home to tens of thousands of people. Their skylines were dominated by towering stone pyramids, temples, and palaces, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings and vibrant stucco masks. These were not just architectural marvels, they were cosmic maps, their alignments precisely calculated to track the movements of the sun, moon, Venus, and the stars. The Maya were obsessive astronomers and brilliant mathematicians. They developed the concept of zero independently of the Old World and created a series of complex, interlocking calendars that could measure time with incredible accuracy over vast cycles. They were also the only fully literate civilization in the pre-Columbian Americas. They developed a complex hieroglyphic writing system which they used to record their history, mythology, and political propaganda on stone monuments or stelae, as well as in books made of bark paper known as codices. For a long time, this script was unreadable, shrouding the Maya in a thick veil of mystery. But in recent decades, major breakthroughs in decipherment have allowed us to read their stories in their own words. These texts reveal a world of courtly intrigue, dynastic succession, and constant ritualized warfare. The city-states were locked in a perpetual dance of alliance and conflict, vying for dominance, resources, and captives for their elaborate religious ceremonies, which sometimes included human sacrifice. The lives of the Maya were governed by a complex and often bloody cosmology, a belief system that required constant appeasement of the gods to maintain the order of the universe. For centuries, this system flourished, particularly during the Classic period, from roughly 250 to 900 AD. Population boomed, cities expanded, and art and science reached unparalleled heights. The southern lowlands, the heartland of classic Maya civilization, were one of the most densely populated regions on the planet at the time. It seemed as though the Maya kings, with their divine mandate and their mastery of the cosmos, had built a civilization that would last forever. And then it fell apart. Beginning in the late 8th century, the system began to unravel. The signs of decay were subtle at first, then catastrophic. The construction of monuments and temples, the lifeblood of royal propaganda, slowed and then stopped altogether. The last dated stela in the southern lowlands was erected in 909 AD. After that, the historical record, so meticulously kept for centuries, simply goes dark. The great cities were abandoned. The stone palaces and temples were left to the relentless encroachment of the jungle, which swallowed them whole for 1,000 years. The populations of these once teeming urban centers plummeted by as much as 90%. By the time the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, the great cities of the classic Maya were little more than vine-choked mounds, their existence known only through local legends. This was the classic Maya collapse, one of the most profound demographic and political disasters in human history. What could have brought such a vibrant and sophisticated civilization to its knees? For decades, the mystery of the Maya collapse has been a fertile ground for speculation, with theories ranging from disease and invasion to social revolution and even alien abduction. But modern science has begun to peel back the layers of this enigma, revealing a story that is, once again, a complex interplay of human action and environmental consequence. One of the earliest and most enduring theories centers on warfare. As the deciphered texts reveal, conflict was a constant feature of classic Maya society. But in the final century of the classic period, the nature of this warfare appears to have changed. It became more intense, more widespread, and more destructive. What had once been largely ritualized conflicts aimed at capturing high-status enemies became brutal, all-out wars aimed at the complete destruction of rival cities. Archaeological evidence supports this. Fortifications were hastily erected around many cities. Sites show evidence of burning and destruction. The final carved monuments at some sites, like Dos Pilas, record a history of escalating violence and desperation. This endemic warfare would have had a devastating impact on society. It would have disrupted trade routes, destroyed agricultural fields, and diverted precious resources and manpower away from productive activities. As the violence spiraled out of control, the authority of the divine kings, whose primary role was to maintain order and prosperity, would have been fatally undermined. The people, faced with constant fear and uncertainty, may have simply lost faith in the system and abandoned the cities, fleeing into the countryside to escape the chaos. The collapse, in this view, was a political and military implosion. However, like the ancestral Puebloans, the Maya were also at the mercy of their environment, and here too, the story of the climate is written in the earth. Scientists have analyzed sediment cores from lakes and coastal areas throughout the Maya region. The layers of sediment contain chemical signatures, like the ratio of oxygen isotopes in snail shells, that reveal the history of rainfall. The results are startling. These studies show that the period of the Maya collapse, from roughly 800 to 950 AD, coincided with a series of severe, prolonged droughts. There were multiple mega-droughts, some lasting for decades. For a civilization dependent on a complex system of reservoirs and canals to capture and store rainwater for the dry season, the failure of the annual rains would have been apocalyptic. As reservoirs dried up and crops failed, the cities would have faced a severe water and food crisis. Malnutrition would have been rampant, increasing susceptibility to disease. One theory suggests that outbreaks of epidemic diseases, perhaps a hemorrhagic fever, could have swept through the dense, unsanitary urban populations, killing a significant portion of the population and triggering a mass exodus of the survivors. But the Maya were not just passive victims of climate change. They were active agents in shaping their landscape, and their own success may have sown the seeds of their destruction. To feed their massive populations and to fuel the fires needed to produce the lime plaster for their enormous temples, the Maya engaged in widespread deforestation. Using satellite imagery and pollen analysis from lake sediments, researchers have shown that vast areas of the jungle were cleared around the major cities. This deforestation had a direct impact on the local climate. Trees play a crucial role in the water cycle, releasing moisture into the atmosphere through transpiration. Large-scale deforestation can lead to a significant reduction in local rainfall, effectively making the droughts worse. Furthermore, the clearing of the sloped jungle terrain for agriculture led to massive soil erosion. The precious topsoil would have washed away during heavy rains, reducing the fertility of the land and silting up the reservoirs, diminishing their capacity to store water. The Maya were caught in a vicious cycle. As the population grew, they needed to clear more land, which in turn worsened the droughts and depleted the soil, leading to food shortages that their political system was unable to solve. This leads to another key piece of the puzzle: the breakdown of the economic and political system. The divine kings based their authority on their ability to mediate with the gods and ensure agricultural prosperity. They used their control over trade routes to import prestige goods like jade and obsidian, which were essential for the rituals that legitimized their power. As the environmental crisis deepened, their power base crumbled. When the rains failed and the crops withered, the king's rituals were exposed as ineffective. Their inability to feed their people would have led to a crisis of faith and widespread civil unrest. At the same time, the escalating warfare likely disrupted the long-distance trade networks, cutting off the supply of prestige goods and further weakening the king's authority. The system was failing from the top down and the bottom up. So what was the final trigger? It was likely not one thing, but a perfect storm of interconnected factors. Prolonged, severe drought, exacerbated by self-inflicted deforestation, led to agricultural collapse and famine. This environmental crisis fueled intense warfare between city-states competing for dwindling resources. The failure of the divine kings to solve these problems led to a loss of faith, social unrest, and a complete breakdown of the political and economic order. Faced with starvation, war, and a failed government, the Maya people did what any rational person would do. They voted with their feet. They abandoned the dying cities of the southern lowlands and migrated to other regions, particularly the northern Yucatan and the highlands of Guatemala, where rainfall was more reliable. The Maya people did not vanish. Their descendants, millions of whom still speak Mayan languages, are a vibrant part of Central America today. But the great cities of their classical age were lost. The knowledge of their writing, their mathematics, and their history faded away, locked in the unreadable carvings on the jungle-choked ruins. The collapse of the classic Maya serves as one of history's most stark and well-documented examples of how a complex civilization can be brought down by a combination of climate change, environmental degradation, and political instability. A cautionary tale that resonates with unsettling power in our own time. We now travel to a different river in a different part of the world and journey much further back in time. Our destination is the dusty plains of modern-day Pakistan, the cradle of one of the world's great pristine civilizations, a contemporary of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet in many ways far more enigmatic. This was the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization, and its story is one of astonishing achievement, followed by a profound and perplexing silence. Flourishing for over 1,000 years, from roughly 3,300 to 1,300 BCE, this Bronze Age culture was vast, covering an area larger than its Egyptian and Mesopotamian counterparts combined. At its heart were two massive, exceptionally well-planned cities, Harappa and, most famously, Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead. These were not primitive settlements. They were sophisticated urban centers, each housing an estimated 40,000 to 50,000 people at their peak. The most striking feature of these cities is their incredible degree of planning and standardization. Mohenjo-Daro was laid out on a meticulous grid system, with main streets broad enough for 2 ox carts to pass. The buildings were constructed from baked bricks of a remarkably uniform size and quality, a testament to a centralized and highly organized system of production. But their most celebrated achievement lay beneath the streets. The cities of the Indus Valley possessed the world's first known urban sanitation systems. A complex network of covered drains ran through the city, collecting wastewater from individual homes. Many houses had their own private bathrooms and latrines, connected to this municipal drainage system. This level of civic planning and concern for public health would not be seen again in many parts of the world for thousands of years. At the heart of Mohenjo-Daro was a raised citadel, which housed the city's most impressive public buildings. The most famous of these is the Great Bath, a large, rectangular tank beautifully constructed with waterproofed bricks. It was likely used for ritual purification, a central element of their religious life. The citadel also contained a massive granary, a clear sign of a well-managed agricultural economy and a central authority capable of collecting and storing surplus food. Despite this evidence of organization, the Indus Valley civilization is profoundly mysterious. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, they did not leave behind grand palaces, monumental royal tombs, or towering temples to the gods. There are no massive statues of kings or grandiose depictions of military conquests. Their society appears to have been remarkably egalitarian, at least in its public art and architecture. The largest houses are not dramatically bigger than the smallest, suggesting a less stratified social structure than in other ancient civilizations. This lack of ostentatious displays of power has led to intense debate. Who ruled these cities? Was it a priestly class, a council of merchants, or some form of collective governance? We simply do not know. Their political structure remains a complete enigma, hidden behind the uniformity of their material culture. Perhaps the greatest mystery of all is their writing. The Indus Valley people had a sophisticated script, a system of hundreds of unique signs that have been found on thousands of small soapstone seals, pottery, and other artifacts. These seals, often bearing the exquisitely carved image of an animal like a unicorn or a bull, are masterpieces of miniature art. But despite more than a century of effort by scholars from around the world, the Indus script remains undeciphered. This is the crucial missing piece of the puzzle. Without the ability to read their words, we have no access to their history, their myths, their laws, or their names. We know them only through their silent artifacts. Their cities are like a meticulously organized library where every single book is written in a language we cannot understand. Their final chapter is, for us, unwritten. And that final chapter is a dramatic one. Around 1900 BCE, after centuries of stability and prosperity, the system began to break down. The great cities went into a period of decline and were eventually abandoned. Trade with Mesopotamia, which had been active for centuries, ceased. The standardized weights and measures fell out of use. The art of writing was lost. The population dispersed into smaller, more rural settlements. What could have caused the collapse of such a seemingly robust and well-organized civilization? Why would people abandon these marvels of urban planning? For many years, the leading theory was invasion. In the 1920s, the archaeologist who first excavated Mohenjo-Daro, Sir Mortimer Wheeler, discovered several groups of skeletons in the upper layers of the city, seemingly unburied and lying in contorted positions in the streets. Wheeler interpreted this as evidence of a final, violent massacre. He linked this to the arrival of Indo-Aryan-speaking peoples from the north who are mentioned in the ancient Hindu texts, the Vedas, as conquering the local population. He famously wrote that the god Indra stands accused of the destruction of the Indus Valley civilization. This Aryan invasion theory became the standard explanation for decades. However, modern archaeological and forensic analysis has largely debunked this dramatic scenario. The skeletons, while tragic, do not show evidence of a single coordinated battle. Their injuries are varied, and they date from different time periods. They are more likely the victims of crime or people who died of disease and were not properly buried during a period of social breakdown. There is no evidence of widespread burning or a destruction layer in the city that would indicate a massive invasion. With the invasion theory discredited, researchers turn to other explanations, and as with the Maya and the ancestral Pobloans, the prime suspect is climate change. The Indus Valley civilization was, like Egypt, a gift of the river. But it was not just dependent on the mighty Indus. A second parallel river system, the Ghaggar Hakra, flowed through the heart of the Harappan territory. Many of the largest settlements were located along its banks. Today, the Ghaggar Hakra is a dry seasonal riverbed. But geological and satellite evidence suggests that in the Bronze Age, it was a massive glacier-fed river, perhaps the mythical Sarasvati River celebrated in the Vedas. Sometime around 2000 BCE, a combination of tectonic shifts and a changing climate appears to have altered the river systems of the region dramatically. The Ghaggar Hakra began to dry up, while the Indus River shifted its course. For a civilization built on river-based agriculture and trade, this would have been an unmitigated disaster. The drying of the Ghaggar Hakra would have forced the abandonment of the many cities and towns along its banks. The unpredictable flooding and shifting of the Indus would have made farming in its floodplain increasingly difficult. There is also strong evidence that the reliable summer monsoons, which the Harappans depended on for their agriculture, began to weaken and become more erratic during this period. A prolonged period of drought would have crippled their agricultural surplus, the very foundation of their urban society. The massive granaries at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa would have emptied, leading to famine and social unrest. This climate-driven collapse is currently the most widely accepted theory. It explains the gradual decline and the dispersal of the population away from the major urban centers towards areas with more reliable rainfall in the east and south. It was not a sudden death, but a slow, grinding decline, as the environmental foundations of their civilization eroded beneath their feet. Other contributing factors may have played a role. There is some evidence of an increase in infectious diseases like leprosy and tuberculosis in the final phases of the civilization, which would have been exacerbated by malnutrition and the breakdown of sanitation systems. The collapse of their trade networks with Mesopotamia could have had a significant economic impact, particularly for the urban elites. It's possible that the rigid and conservative nature of their society, which had been a source of strength and stability for centuries, became a weakness. They may have been unable to adapt quickly enough to the rapidly changing environmental conditions. Their meticulously planned cities were designed for a world that no longer existed. The silence of the Indus script means we may never know the full story. We cannot read their accounts of the changing world, their pleas to the gods, or their debates about what to do. We can only see the result, the abandonment of some of the most advanced cities of the ancient world. Mohenjo-Daro stands today as a silent, brick-built ghost, a testament to a brilliant civilization whose final words are lost to us. Their disappearance a profound lesson in how even the most organized societies are ultimately dependent on the caprice of the natural world. While Roanoke, Mesa Verde, the Maya, and the Indus Valley represent some of the most profound and large-scale disappearances in the historical record, they are far from the only examples. Throughout history and across the globe, other communities have met with sudden, enigmatic ends, leaving behind whispers and ruins that continue to puzzle us. Each one offers a unique variation on this recurring theme of societal fragility. Let us travel to the Aegean Sea, to the beautiful Greek island of Santorini, which in the Bronze Age was known as Thera. Here, buried under a thick blanket of volcanic ash, lies the remarkably preserved city of Akrotiri. Flourishing around 1600 BCE, Akrotiri was a prosperous outpost of the Minoan civilization, a bustling port town with paved streets, multi-story houses, and a sophisticated plumbing system. The interiors of its buildings were adorned with vibrant, stunningly beautiful frescoes depicting scenes of daily life, exotic animals, and mysterious religious rituals. It was a wealthy, cosmopolitan, and highly advanced society. And then it was obliterated by one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history. The eruption of the Thera volcano was a cataclysm of unimaginable scale, an event that may have inspired the legend of Atlantis. Like Pompeii, the volcanic ash that destroyed Akrotiri also preserved it, creating an incredible snapshot of Minoan life. We have furniture, pottery, and those magnificent frescoes, all frozen in time. But there is one crucial, baffling difference between Akrotiri and Pompeii. In Pompeii, we found the bodies of thousands of victims, their final moments captured in plaster casts. In Akrotiri, despite decades of extensive excavation, virtually no human remains have been found. This raises an incredible possibility that the inhabitants of Akrotiri knew the eruption was coming and managed to carry out a full-scale, successful evacuation of the entire city. Volcanic eruptions are often preceded by a series of earthquakes and smaller emissions. Perhaps the people of Akrotiri heeded these warnings. The archaeological evidence seems to support this. The city shows signs of an earlier earthquake, with some rebuilding efforts underway. Crucially, no valuable, portable items like jewelry or metal tools were found in the houses. It seems the people packed up their most precious belongings and left. But this solution to one mystery only opens another, larger one. Where did they go? An entire city's population, likely numbering in the thousands, took to their ships and sailed away. Did they try to resettle on nearby Crete, the heart of the Minoan world? Did they become refugees scattered across the Aegean islands? The historical record is silent. The eruption of Thera was so devastating, triggering massive tsunamis and causing widespread climate disruption, that their fate may have been sealed even if they did escape the initial blast. The people of Akrotiri vanished not in fire and ash, but on the waves of the sea. Their final destination unknown. Staying in ancient Greece, we find the story of Helike, a powerful city-state in Achaia that was, for a time, the leader of the Achaean League. Helike was a major cultural and religious center, famous for its temple dedicated to Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes. In the winter of 373 BCE, the city's patron deity turned on it with savage fury. In a single night, according to ancient writers like Pausanias, Helike was destroyed. A massive earthquake struck, followed almost immediately by a colossal tsunami that swept in from the Gulf of Corinth. The ground beneath the city, saturated with water, essentially liquefied, and the entire city sank into an inland lagoon. For centuries after, the submerged ruins of Helike were a grim tourist attraction, its statues and temple roofs visible beneath the water surface. But over time, the lagoon silted over, and the location of Helike was lost. It became a legend, a story of divine retribution. For 2 millennia, Helike was considered little more than a myth. But in 2001, after years of searching, archaeologists finally rediscovered the lost city, buried under meters of river sediment. They have uncovered buildings, city streets, and artifacts, confirming the ancient accounts with stunning accuracy. The story of Helike is a chilling reminder of the sheer, instantaneous power of nature. There was no time to evacuate, no time to prepare. One moment there was a thriving city, the next only water and silence. The entire population vanished in a single terrifying night, swallowed by the earth and the sea. Returning to North America, we find another great urban center that rose and fell with bewildering speed. Long before Columbus, near the modern-day city of St. Louis, stood the largest city north of Mexico, Cahokia. At its peak around 1100 AD, Cahokia was a sprawling metropolis, home to as many as 20,000 people. Its heart was a complex of over 120 massive, man-made earthen mounds, the largest of which, Monk's Mound, is a 4-terraced platform larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Cahokia was a political, economic, and religious powerhouse, the center of the Mississippian culture that dominated the American Midwest and Southeast. They were sophisticated farmers, growing vast fields of maize. They were master artisans, creating intricate pottery and shell carvings. They were also fearsome warriors, and their society appears to have been highly stratified, ruled by a powerful chief who lived atop Monk's Mound, mediating between the earthly and celestial realms. For 2 centuries, Cahokia was the undisputed center of its world, and then, in a pattern that is now eerily familiar, it rapidly declined. By 1350, the great city was almost completely abandoned. The mounds were left to be covered by grass, the grand central plaza fell silent, and the population scattered. The reasons for Cahokia's collapse are still a subject of intense debate, a puzzle with many of the same pieces we've seen elsewhere. Evidence points to environmental degradation. The Cahokians cleared vast tracts of forest for fuel and to build their massive wooden palisades, leading to deforestation and increased flooding from the nearby Mississippi River. There is also evidence of a major climate shift in the region, a little ice age that would have shortened growing seasons and stressed their maize-based agriculture. As in other cases, social and political factors were likely at play. There are signs of increasing violence and social unrest in the city's final years. Some have even suggested that the city's very success was its undoing, that it grew too large, too fast, creating problems of sanitation, disease, and resource management that its leaders could not solve. Like the Maya, the people of Cahokia vanished from their capital, but their culture lived on, influencing the native tribes of the region for centuries to come. These stories from Akrotiri, Helike, and Cahokia add depth and texture to our investigation. They show that the phenomenon of the vanishing city is a universal one, a recurring crisis point in human history. Whether brought down by a sudden, cataclysmic act of nature, or by the slower, more complex unraveling of society and environment, the result is the same: a great silence where there was once a thriving human community, and a mystery that challenges our assumptions about our own permanence. It is tempting to view this phenomenon of the vanishing city as a relic of the ancient past, a problem for societies that lacked our modern understanding of science, engineering, and social organization. We look at the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Mesa Verde and feel a sense of distance, of separation. But the truth is that communities continue to vanish and cities continue to die. The forces that drove these ancient disappearances are still at work today, sometimes in new and terrifying forms. Consider the city of Pripyat in modern-day Ukraine. In 1986, it was a young, vibrant city of nearly 50,000 people, a model city of the Soviet Union, built to house the workers of the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It had schools, hospitals, apartment blocks, and an amusement park that was set to open in a matter of days. It was a city with a future. On April 26, 1986, that future was annihilated. The catastrophic explosion of Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl plant released a plume of radioactive fallout that drifted directly over the city. For 36 hours, as the reactor burned, the authorities hesitated. Then the order was given. The entire city was to be evacuated. The announcement came over the loudspeakers. Residents had 2 hours to gather their essential belongings for what they were told would be a temporary 3-day evacuation. They never returned. Pripyat was abandoned overnight, its 50,000 inhabitants scattered across the Soviet Union. The city was left exactly as it was on that spring day in 1986. School books lie open on desks. Dolls are strewn across the floors of kindergartens. And the bumper cars of the amusement park sit rusting, waiting for children who will never arrive. Pripyat is a modern-day Pompeii, a city frozen in time not by volcanic ash, but by an invisible poison. It is a chilling testament to the dangers of our own technology. The disappearance of Pripyat was not caused by drought or invasion, but by human error and hubris. It is a ghost city of the atomic age, its silent streets a permanent, haunting reminder of the catastrophic price of failure. Or consider the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania. In the 1960s, it was a small but stable coal mining community. In 1962, a fire was started in a landfill that happened to be located in an abandoned strip mine. The fire ignited an anthracite coal seam running beneath the town, and it has been burning ever since. For decades, the residents of Centralia lived with a secret, subterranean inferno. Smoke and toxic gases seeped up through the ground. The earth became hot to the touch. Roads buckled and sinkholes opened up, sometimes swallowing entire sections of backyard. The situation gained national attention in the 1980s when the federal government, realizing the fire was unstoppable and the town uninhabitable, allocated funds to buy out the residents and relocate them. Most people took the offer and left. Centralia, once home to over 1,000 people, now has a population in the single digits. It is a near ghost town, its street grid still visible, but most of its houses demolished. It is a city that is vanishing in slow motion, being consumed from below by a fire that experts believe could continue to burn for another 250 years. Centralia is a casualty of the industrial age, a community erased by the very resource that gave it life. Nature, too, continues to erase our settlements with the same sudden violence it displayed at Hellake. In 1995, the Soufriere Hills volcano on the Caribbean island of Montserrat, which had been dormant for centuries, roared back to life. A series of devastating eruptions over the next 2 years buried the island's capital city, Plymouth, in more than 40 feet of mud and ash. The city's population was evacuated, and Plymouth was permanently abandoned, declared an exclusion zone. Today, it is a modern ruin, a gray, ash-covered landscape where the tops of buildings poke through the hardened volcanic deposits. The southern half of the island is uninhabitable, and the island's population dropped by more than half. Plymouth was a capital city, wiped from the map in our own lifetime. And perhaps most ominously, we are now witnessing the emergence of a new driver of disappearance, one that links our modern world directly to the fate of ancient civilizations like the Maya and the ancestral Puebloans: climate change. In 2014, the village of Unidogoloa in Fiji became one of the world's first communities to be entirely relocated due to the effects of rising sea levels. For years, the villagers had watched as the encroaching ocean flooded their homes, poisoned their farmland with salt, and eroded the coastline. Finally, with their homes and livelihoods no longer sustainable, the entire village, with assistance from the government, packed up and moved 2 kilometers inland to higher ground. They did not vanish into mystery, but their ancestral home, the place where their families had lived for generations, is now being reclaimed by the sea. It has, for all intents and purposes, disappeared. Unidogoloa is a harbinger of what is to come. Scientists predict that as sea levels continue to rise, countless coastal communities around the world, from small villages in the Pacific to major cities like Miami and Jakarta, will be threatened. We are facing the prospect of mass migrations in abandoned cities on a scale that could dwarf the collapses of the past. The echoes of the great drought that emptied Mesa Verde can be heard in the scientific reports of our own era. These modern stories of Pripyat, Centralia, Plymouth, and Unidogoloa serve as a crucial epilogue to our investigation. They demonstrate that the forces that cause cities to vanish have not been tamed by our technology or our progress. Hubris, environmental degradation, natural disasters, and a changing climate are as potent today as they were thousands of years ago. The ghost cities of the past are not just historical curiosities, they are warnings. They are a mirror in which we can see the potential fragility of our own complex, globalized civilization. We have journeyed through time and across continents, from the desolate shores of Roanoke to the silent cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde, from the jungle-choked pyramids of the Maya to the orderly ruins of Mohenjo-Daro. We have stood in the shadow of volcanoes, traced the beds of dried-up rivers, and sifted through the evidence of war and societal collapse. In each case, the details are different, but the fundamental story is the same. A thriving human community, full of life and purpose, is gone. What have we learned from these historical cold cases? The most profound lesson is one of humility. Our civilizations, for all their apparent strength and complexity, are incredibly fragile systems. They are utterly dependent on a stable climate, a healthy environment, and a functioning social contract. When any one of those pillars begins to crack, the entire structure is at risk of collapse. The people of the Indus Valley engineered brilliant sanitation systems, but they could not engineer a new river when theirs dried up. The Maya mastered the complexities of the calendar, but they could not make the rains return. The ancestral Puebloans built impregnable fortresses in the cliffs, but they could not defend themselves from starvation. Time and again, we see that societies that fail to live in balance with their environment are ultimately doomed. These stories also challenge our very definition of a disappearance. In most cases, the people themselves did not simply vanish into thin air. The Roanoke colonists likely assimilated into native tribes. The ancestral Puebloans and the Maya migrated and built new lives elsewhere. Their descendants are still with us. The people of the Indus Valley dispersed into smaller villages. What vanished was not necessarily the people, but the complex social and political structures that defined them as a civilization. What vanished was their way of life. The city, in this sense, is more than just a collection of buildings. It is an idea, a system of organization. And when that system fails, the city dies, even if the people survive. The empty ruins they leave behind are the tombstones of that dead idea, a testament to a world that ceased to be. And yet, the allure of the true unsolved mystery remains. In the case of Roanoke, the ambiguity is absolute. The complete lack of definitive evidence leaves a void that we fill with our own fears and speculations. It is a ghost story that has become part of a national identity, a reminder of the brutal uncertainty that lay at the heart of the American experiment. The enduring power of these mysteries lies in the questions they force us to ask about ourselves. We are a civilization of city builders. More than half of the world's population now lives in urban centers. We are more interconnected, more technologically advanced, and more powerful than any society that has come before us. But are we any wiser? When future archaeologists sift through the ruins of our own time, what story will they tell? Will they find evidence of a civilization that recognized the warning signs, that learned the lessons of the past, and that took action to create a sustainable and resilient world? Or will they find another collection of ghost cities, another set of silent monuments to a society that grew too fast, consumed too much, and failed to adapt before it was too late? The stories of the lost cities are not just tales of the past. They are a continuous narrative of the human struggle for survival and permanence in a world that is constantly changing. The silence that hangs over Mesa Verde and Mohenjo-Daro is not an ending. It is a question, echoing across the centuries, asking each new generation, will you learn from our mistakes, or are you destined to repeat them? The final chapter of this story is still being written, and we are all holding the pen.